Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 119 of the podcast. I'm Nick, I'm your host, and in this episode I talk with Gina McClain, and Gina and I talk about her personal experience going from a different model of ministry to kids and students to small groups, and going from a model where it was kind of like leading from up front with a lot of people helping out in the room, you know, almost like the chaperone model, or like maybe the big class or large room model, to a weekly small group leader model. And she talks all about her fears in doing that and the decisions that had to be made, the progression, how long it took, all of that. And I get questions all the time about small groups for kids and students. And especially when it comes to kids, it seems like that's been something that's been in student ministry longer. But in kids ministry, I get that question. And my answer is always the same. It is not easier. It's harder. It is easier to run a class model. And I've been there before. It's definitely harder to run a small group model. It requires a lot more in terms of leaders and commitment and resources and all of that. However, it's worth it. It's so worth it. And you'll hear that in this interview with Gina. Gina is actually going to be leading a course, as we talked about, in having effective small groups for kids and students. It's a 6-week course, part of Ministry Boost, that's launching in just a couple weeks. Registration will be open for, I guess, 9 days or something like that, because registration closes on the 27th. So if you're interested in making your small groups more effective, or maybe making that transition to small groups, you might be interested in taking that course with Ministry Boost, or maybe you'll be interested in one of the other courses, or even coaching, where you can do coaching and kind of get a course for free. There's 8 courses, I believe, and 7 coaching groups launching, but all of that wraps up in just a couple weeks in terms of registration, or 9 days, not even a couple weeks. And then we'll kick everything off kind of in October. So if you're interested in any of that, check out ministryboost.org. But let's go ahead now and jump into my conversation with Gina McClain about small groups for kids and students. Well, it's good to have Gina McClain back on the podcast. Welcome back, Gina.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here.
So it wasn't that long ago that you and Jessica were on talking about your book, Don't Quit, but a lot has changed in that short time. So how about you give us an update, or maybe if this is somebody's first time listening to an episode with you on it, maybe tell them a little about yourself and your family, but also what's going on with some of the changes since we last spoke.
Yes. Yeah. So I wrote a book called Don't Quit, and then I quit.
For good reason. I mean, there's quitting, and then there's, so you're going to have to unpack
and then there's
now.
really quitting. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause that's what was going to sell the book, was do the opposite. Yeah.
To stay. I know. No, I did. I left my ministry assignment at the church that I was with for a solid 8 years, Faith Promise Church in Knoxville, Tennessee. And had such an amazing 8-year run of ministry with that church. And yes, I did transition away from Faith Promise. Although I will say this, I didn't quit the ministry. I just quit that particular assignment. And it's hard to explain. I mean, honestly, I honestly wish I could sit down with somebody listening over a cup of coffee and just kind of explain what God did in that time. But it really just started with a stirring in my own heart about wanting to have the opportunity to lead NextGen ministry from preschool all the way up through high school. And at Faith Promise, we have it was honestly just an amazing leadership culture at Faith Promise, and I had the opportunity to lead at a pretty high level with a lot of influence there. However, the opportunity to get to lead NextGen ministry came, I guess it was probably early in 2018, late 2017, when I got a phone call, and God kind of dropped that idea of getting to transition to Nashville, Tennessee, to a church called Crosspoint, which is also a multi-site church, and lead NextGen ministry there. So we started with some conversations there early in the year, and just kind of talked through and prayed through what would that look like for our family, and ultimately felt our hearts just gravitating to what God was doing at Crosspoint. And so as hard as it was to leave Faith Promise, we did last June. I think it was in June. I officially started at Crosspoint in early April, and in early May. And then in June, we actually moved our family to Nashville, Tennessee. And so that's where we are. So I'm now leading NextGen Ministries at Crosspoint Church, which is a 5-campus church, multi-site church in and around Nashville, and kind of hit the ground running once we got here, having a great time. I mean, it's all around just been a great experience.
That's cool. Well, definitely, like moving where God wants you isn't quitting, even though that means leaving one thing to go to another, for sure. And I know, you know this, but like our kind of group of friends that knew about this opportunity with Crosspoint, and it was like, no, this seems like the best thing ever. You know what I mean? For them.
Yeah.
Like they're going to be so blessed by having you, but even for you. So, I mean, it just definitely seemed like that kind of thing. It's just kind of funny that it coincided with the book.
I know. That was hard. It was a hard thing to swallow right there. I wrestled with that a little bit, but you're right. I mean, it isn't, God's going to move in different ways, sometimes in ways you don't predict. And that definitely was not, I didn't predict it. In fact, I remember the first time that I talked to the leadership at Crosspoint, I went directly to my executive pastor there at Faith Promise. And I can't say enough about the leadership at Faith Promise, honestly. When I went to Josh and I just said, hey, I don't have reason to look elsewhere. I love where I am and I love what I'm doing. But there's a curiosity that's building in me and I just need your blessing. And he gracefully gave that. And so when I talked to Crosspoint, the first thing I told him is I said, hey, I can't tell you how much I want to come across as so unimpressive right now, because I have no desire to leave where I am. I have no desire to move my family. None of this makes sense right now. So I just think it's just a reminder that we can't predict what God's going to do. We can't predict where he's going to lead. We follow where he leads and remain faithful to that and trust that everything else works out, so and it's been a good run.
I obviously don't know your former executive pastor at Faith Promise, Josh, but I've listened to his episode with Carrie Newhoff on Carrie's podcast. And listening to that, it's like, it makes sense that's how he responds. Seems like a great guy, great leader. And that's how you should do it if you can, right? I mean, in a healthy environment, you should be able to go to your leadership if you're thinking about making a change. And it shouldn't be met with fear and weirdness. But I'm sure people listening have experienced that too. So unfortunately, it's not always healthy like that. So we're going to talk about something that you're passionate about. We've talked about actually here a little bit on the podcast before, because we talked about your book, The Guts and Glory of Small Group, the first time you were on. So we're going to come back and talk small groups for kids and students again and kind of unpack your journey with it, because obviously this model of ministry is becoming more and more popular, but there's still tons of people in both children and student world who maybe haven't made that switch for whatever reason. And so I wanted to unpack what that journey was like for you. You're leading a course with Ministry Boost this fall about effective small groups. So anybody that wants to make their groups better or start, that might be interested in that, but for free, they can just hear you kind of talk about the journey. So I want to start with, and I'm not even sure which church we're going to be starting in, because I don't know that part of your journey, but where were you and what was the model that you were using, let's say in kids ministry or something, when it wasn't small groups? What was the model before?
Yes. So I'll try to give a broad overview. I started out in ministry. I always say I grew up in ministry at Life Church. And I was at Life Church for 10 years. And when I was leading in kids ministry, at least in the context that I'm referring to right now, when I was leading in kids ministry, it was my last 5 years that I was on staff. And if anyone who's familiar with Life Church knows, Life Church just knows how to create a dynamic, engaging environment for kids and students. And in fact, that was one of the things, one of our go-to phrases was, we want to capture their attention so that Jesus can touch their heart. And so everything came down to capturing their attention. And so our programming on Sunday morning, on the weekend, was very much a large group experience, especially specifically when it comes to elementary, so that kindergarten through 5th grade experience. That large group environment was dynamic. When kids would walk in, they would be wowed by the environment. There would be fun things they would get to do. We would draw them in utilizing video and music and lights and stage props and a variety of very engaging elements to the experience in order to teach a scriptural truth. And honestly, it was great. It was like a party every weekend, We would always say, man, your VBS, if your VBS is a blowout, your Sunday should look like your VBS, every single week. every 7 days, you make it the best experience that a kid could have. And so that's where I started. And so I had always had a great love for that large group experience. Now, we had what I would call small group environments, but that was a separate event that you actually had to register for. And we learned that from years ago from Saddleback Church. We had the opportunity to go out there to a purpose-driven children's ministry event, back in the day. And we learned from Saddleback that you could create a small group experience where families actually register to participate in, so that you can be very intentional about grouping your kids with, in specific age groups and gender-based groups. And you could be more intentional with your training of your small group leaders so that they can have a very quality small group experience. And so that event was 90 minutes in length, and there was, began with that large group element that was, again, kind of mirrored the weekend. It was really fun. It was really engaging. And then we would break kids out into small groups. And honestly, at the campus that I led at Life Church, our small groups invaded the entire building. They just spread out everywhere. From kindergarten through fifth grade, we had groups all over the building during this small group time. And honestly, it was so incredibly rewarding to walk through the building during small group time and have all of these little circles happening all over the space, and small group leaders leaning in, and kids really having this very meaningful interaction within their small group. And so that's what I was raised on, basically, in ministry. That's what I knew. When I transitioned and God called us out of Life Church and we moved to Faith Promise Church to be a part of Faith Promise, one of the things, well, first let me back up here, because this is one of the things that was really eye-opening for me. No matter how great the Sunday morning was, and no matter how great we did it at advertising and promoting our small group experience that we had for kids, we could only get a certain percentage of the kids who came on Sunday morning to actually engage with our Sunday night or Wednesday night discipleship ministry, right? You tracking with me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so in some ways, because I'm thinking as you were describing your old model, that wouldn't be that old, right? Like when I think of the model I grew up in, even the model I taught in as a volunteer was Sunday school. And that's probably what a lot of people are used to. Now, Sunday school can look a lot of different ways, right? You can run it like groups. You can run it like a class. But ours was like a class model. It wasn't
exactly
what you described. And I actually thought of VBS when you described it, like big, large group every week. And you're saying your small groups were a different night of the week.
Different night of the week. Yeah.
So
different
in some
night
ways,
of the week.
that's similar to like what you see a lot in student ministry now, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's
not like not everybody, but a lot of people have a large group on the weekend and small groups during the week.
Right. Right. And the inherent challenge with that is it works great if 100% come on Sunday morning and those same 100% come on Wednesday night for the small group time. But that just wasn't a reality, and at the end of the day, I could go into more detail, but really bottom line was the kids who were coming on Sunday morning, I couldn't guarantee that we could group every one of them, that we could place every one of them into a small group, which meant that there were a lot of kids who were not basically who didn't have the opportunity to sit in a small group with their peers and a small group leader who knew them and have a conversation about their faith. And one thing that we're learning right now that we more and more as we learn about how faith develops, we know that conversation is pivotal to how faith can develop in the heart and mind of kids and students. And so that conversation's critical. The other piece that was also just really hard on my heart was even despite the fact that we had such an engaging experience for kids when they came in, at the campus that I led ministry, at that time we had 6 worship experiences on the weekend. And, the benefit of that, the beauty of that is it really didn't matter what was happening, what you had on the docket for that weekend, didn't matter what was on your schedule for Sunday morning. We had a time that you could make it to church. So if you had something happening Sunday morning, then come Sunday night. If you had something happening Sunday night, then come Sunday morning. Shoot, if you can't make it on Sunday at all, come Saturday night. Like we had so many options for when you can come to church. And that's beautiful from a flexibility standpoint. The challenge is that we had kids that would come one weekend, they're there Saturday night at 5:00. The next weekend, they're there Saturday night at 7. The next weekend, they might show up to our 8:30 service on Sunday morning. We really never knew when a kid was going to come. And so how could we create an environment where they could have the same leader every single week so they could be known by that leader when they bounced around and moved around so much that we couldn't keep up with where they were. So there were some inherent challenges that we had to deal with that made it very difficult for kids to be known, and for kids to have a quality conversation about their faith. And those were the two things that really kind of, were misses on that I could see on a regular basis. We would have all these families that would come through our Life Kids experiences, and they were amazing families, and these kids were amazing kids, and they needed somebody who knew them and who was expecting them to be there on Sunday morning and who couldn't wait to see them. And I couldn't provide that in the context that I had at that time. And so that was one of those things. It was kind of like a voice in the back of my mind, like, I love what we're doing, but gosh, that really bothers me that I can't provide that. Mm-hmm. When we made the transition from Life Church to Faith Promise, that was when it became even more apparent. When we transitioned to Faith Promise, Faith Promise had been doing 252 curriculum, which is the orange curriculum. They've been doing 252 curriculum ever since North Point made it available years and years ago. So mm-hmm. they've been implementing that curriculum for a long time. So it was very much ingrained in their culture, but it was new to me. I was familiar with the orange strategy, at least from a distance, and really liked what I saw, but I didn't have any practical hands-on experience with the idea of the large group, small group model within the Sunday morning worship experience. That was brand new to me. And mm-hmm. so although I love the idea that every kid, when they walk through the door, they're going to sit in a small group that day. And I love the idea of the same small group leader is going to be with those group of kids. They're going to show up in their life every single week when that kid comes to church. I love the concept of that. It was very foreign to me. There were some gaps, with where the ministry was at the time, just like a lot of children's ministries, we struggled with recruiting weekly volunteers who would commit to being a small group leader and to show up predictably in a kid's life every Sunday morning. We struggled with really being able to equip them with how to navigate a small group time and really make the most of it. We struggled with defining the win for them so that they knew when they were doing a good job and when they were missing the mark. We struggled with those things just like every other children's ministry does. And what it resulted in was, what I could see was the potential for really a solid small group ministry. But what I could also see was that I lacked the skill set in order to be able to get it there. And that was, I think, really was the hardest thing for me, because I felt like I was turning the Titanic, and I was equipped. I want to say I was equipped with an oar. I didn't even have that. I had a teaspoon, And it was nothing on anyone else's part. It was what I felt like was a deficit within me, like I don't bring this experience to the table. I don't bring the knowledge and understanding of even how to begin to execute quality small group ministry on Sunday morning, in the middle, because honestly, again, I'm applying my past experience. Our Sunday morning experience was a little bit chaotic, right? It was crazy.
Just like VBS or camp.
Just like VBS,
yeah. Anything large group like that, sure.
Totally. You've got this energy, and there's an element to it that's a little bit out of control, but it's fun, and that's kind of what you thrive on. And yet on my Wednesday night discipleship ministry, which at the time was called Connect, there was a little bit more control over that, right? I knew who was walking through those doors, and I knew which group they were going to go into. I didn't have to adjust on the fly to find a place for a small group for a kid to plug into, because I did that before they even showed up. So there was a level of measure of control that I had on Wednesday night to take that idea of intentionally grouping kids and move it to Sunday morning. That felt like way too much. It's the biggest mountain to climb, and I didn't know how to get over it.
And part of it would include, there's a million things that are going to change, but part of it would include, I guess, killing a midweek program, which that alone is a kind of change that's hard to navigate.
Totally. Yeah. Talk about the scary thing. The beauty is, I can say this. I have had to shut down ministries before. I shut down a very quality Mother's Day Out program within my first year at Life Church. So I know what it's like to say something, to take something that parents and families and staff value at a very high level, and to say, hey, this is just not the right direction for the season, and to close that ministry out. I know what that's like. Thankfully, I didn't have to do that at Faith Promise. They didn't have a midweek program that I needed to phase out. They were very bought into the idea and had already started down that road of implementing small groups on Sunday morning. We just needed a better system for recruiting quality small group leaders and for empowering them with the vision and the strategy to make small group great. And so those are the things that I had to figure out how to do.
So you had like a different model at Life Church. You come to Faith Promise. They're kind of doing the model you want to get to, but like you said, not to its full extent. Obviously, you had concerns, fears about changing, which anybody listening, I mean, understands that, the fear of changing something, and then what if it doesn't work, or what if there's like a lot of backlash, or like kind of like you said, what if you don't feel equipped to do it because you've never been there? But I guess at some point you were just convinced, though, like this is definitely how we need to do it. Like you didn't have to be sold anymore on the model. You just had to figure out, okay, how are we going to get there?
Exactly. And that's the crazy thing. I wish that I could say that this was a really smooth process from beginning to end, and that I saw the potential. I was bought in that it could be done, that I could figure it out eventually, and then we were there. But that's not, it was so herky jerky, you know. It was more like a step in, like I put a toe in the pool and I'm like, I know this is right. I know it's right because I've actually seen it. You know, I've visited other churches where I've seen it taking place. I'm like, that's so good. And yet 2 steps back, right? It's almost like that kid who, you know, his dad's in the pool saying, jump to me in the deep end. And the kid's like hesitating, like, I know you're going to catch me, but I don't know that I can jump. And that's really a lot of what I felt like. Like, I don't know that I can pull this off. You know, I remember sitting in my office with a gentleman who I had the privilege of serving with. And it was just a really talented guy. He came from a church in Ohio where he had implemented small groups with weekly small group leaders, and kids were grouped based upon what school they attended. And so there was a very defined process for routing kids to small groups so they had the greatest chance of really creating good, solid peer relationships, not just on Sunday morning, but in their schools as well. And then a weekly small group leader who was equipped with the vision, and the clarity, knew what it looked like to win in small groups. And so he had this experience. And I remember sitting in the office with me, and he was like, and he is just begging me, Gina, seriously, you've got to do this. We know we can do this. And I remember looking at him and saying, Brian, I know this can be done. I'm being honest. I don't know if I can do it, you know? And I was just at such a raw point where I thought, I don't know that I have the skill set. You know, I knew what I knew, and this is a whole new set of tricks. You know, and it was just this very raw fear of failure. Like, what if I can't convince a small group leader to show up every week and be predictable in a kid's life? I'd never done that before. What if I can't do that? You know, what if I can't convince a small group leader to decide to get out on Saturday morning and to show up at the soccer fields because a couple of the kids in his group are playing soccer that morning? What if I can't do that? You know, what does that say about me as a ministry leader and my ability to lead with vision? So it was just I found myself at a very raw point where I knew it was the right direction to go. I didn't know how, and I didn't know if I could be the one to figure it out.
What tipped it? Like, what gave you the confidence, or was it kind of like, I'm just going to go anyway because it's the right thing? I mean, like, what was the thing, you know, that put you over that hump?
I think the tipping point for me was the fear of not doing it more than the fear of doing it. You know, I remember I had the privilege, and I understand this is so few people have this privilege. I had the privilege of sitting across from Reggie Joyner. One time we were having a conversation, and I think I'd been at Faith Promise for a year at that point. And I asked him, I said, Reggie, if you were in my shoes, what would you tell me? And he said, build the ministry you wish you'd walked into. And that was such a gut punch for me. It was so clarifying for me, because when I walked into Faith Promise, you know, if you'd asked me, what do I wish I'd walked into? What I wish I'd walked into was a ministry that had a solid system where kids could be known, where we truly had a fighting chance at partnering with parents, right? and where leaders could invest in kids and feel like they're actually making an impact, and at the end of the day, after 10 years at Life Church and 5 solid years in that large group, dynamic, amazing experience kind of environment, I knew that large group experience is not a place where kids were going to be known, where we could truly partner with parents, and where leaders could feel like they were really making an impact on how kids develop in their faith. So and I don't mean to say that as if what Life Kids is not great. So please don't hear me. Life Church is known and sets the tone for amazing, engaging ministry, and what God is doing through that church and through Life Kids. I can't say enough great things about Allison Evans and the team that she leads. So I hope that I don't misguide or misstate anything here. One of the things that Allie has led the charge over the past few years in integrating and actually taking that Connect ministry, which is that small group ministry, and saying, hey, that can't be on Wednesday night anymore. That needs to be on Sunday morning. And so she led the charge through what I would think is an even greater challenge than what I face, which was to take a very quality ministry that was winning and move it off of Wednesday night and move it to Sunday morning, to where now their system really is truly plugging kids into small groups on Sunday morning during that weekend worship experience. So she's changed that system, and has spearheaded that. And I think, there are very few leaders out there that could do what she has done. I can only speak to the experience that I had when I was with Life Church, in that our weekend experience didn't group kids. It didn't provide that avenue where they could sit in a small group with a small group leader who showed up predictably and weekly in their life, who gave them an opportunity to have a conversation about their faith and about how that Bible story that we just heard, and that Bible truth, how that Bible truth can apply to them today. That just wasn't the system that we had in place at the time.
And that's true of most churches. I mean, there's always exceptions, and somebody like Jim Wyman, who was doing preteen ministry in the 80s or something,
Right,
but most churches were not doing small groups for kids and students 15 years ago.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you learn about it, you buy into it, then you try it. I mean, try it makes it sound so easy. We're talking about how hard it is.
Right.
But you move to it, and then you see the benefits, and it's like, oh, okay. It's, there's always pioneers and people like Jim who are like way out in front. But for most churches, even great churches like Life Church, you get really good at that model, and you do it that way. And it's not like, that's the other thing, is none of these models are like terrible. We're talking about, oh, that's the worst way ever to do church. Or, you know what I mean? It's not like they have no impact. We're just talking about, how do you get the most? How do you give a kid the best experience? How do you give them the best relationship? All that kind of stuff. So I think everybody gets that. You can certainly look through the history and see kind of the models that come and go. And I think that's, in some ways, there are principles I think should stay forever, like the relationship part of small groups. But there are model parts that's like, no, it's okay if that goes away and something new comes in. The other thing I've learned, we won't go down this rabbit trail, but I don't even know this from experience, because our church is a single site church. But if you're multi-service and especially multi-site, the reality is it just fights against consistent small groups for kids.
Yes.
Not necessarily students, because they might have a separate gathering or whatever. Yeah. But certainly for kids, more options just makes it harder, to get people to pick one. I always joke that you can't do that in anything else. I think I'm going to take my kid to school on Tuesdays. Actually, I think they'd do 10 a.m., not 9 a.m. Or, I'm not coming to soccer practice at 9 a.m. I was thinking 10 would be great. You can't do it anywhere else.
That's awesome.
You do it with church.
I never thought about that. It was such a great analogy. No, you're right.
You don't get that choice anywhere. But with church, you feel like you can,
Yeah, yeah. So. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, the ebook, Guts and Glory of Small Groups, just because that was one of the things I wrestled with was, when you offer multiple worship experiences, I can't control when a kid shows up for church. No. But what I did figure out is I can control where they go when they get there. So if there's a chance that, again, when I wrote that book, I was at Faith Promise. We had our largest campus had 5 worship experiences on the weekend, so 2 on Saturday night, 3 on Sunday morning, and so that meant that a kid and I had that campus happened to be large enough to where I had multiple small groups within each grade. So kindergarten, for example. I might have at 2 of our larger services, I might have 4 small group leaders in kindergarten alone at each of those services. So what that meant was, for a kindergartner, if they didn't consistently come to the same worship experience every weekend, which, 50% of those kids didn't, They bounced around to different service times. Well, that meant that they could encounter, even if they came every week, which we both know that's not the case any longer. Families don't tend to come weekly. But even if they did come every single week, that kindergartner could potentially encounter upwards of 12 different small group leaders, depending on the week that they come, all within kindergarten. And so I had to figure out, how do I route them and create a system that routes them specifically to, a specific small group leader, to where I may not be able to get it down to one small group leader because they aren't showing up at the same service time every week, but I can at least narrow it down to 4, or excuse me, 5. So if we've got 5 different options for attending church and they bounce around, then every time they bounce around, they're going to hit a specific small group leader within that service. So I just have a fighting chance at developing some kind of a relationship by reducing the number of small group leaders they could encounter.
Mm-hmm. And our best, even just with multiple services, we've always had to fight that. And the closer they are together, the harder it is, because the easier it is to come to a different one. But and talking to parents and always communicating every fall about choosing a service and the importance. I mean, that always helps. But I really think our best marketing, so to speak, for that idea is just that what they experience. Once they get in the group and they get to know the kids and they get to know the leader, then as a parent, you see the value, and then you make. I mean, I know a number of families who are like, we hate coming to the first service. But our first grader loves his leader. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, we would not come to the first service if it was our choice, but he said we have to, which is great.
If that kid goes home talking about Mr. Bell or Miss Sandy, then, and all they can talk about all week long is Miss Sandy. If Miss Sandy's only at the 8:30 service, then you've got a really good chance that family's going to show up at the 8:30 service because Miss Cindy's there. So you're right. That's your best marketing strategy, is that small group leader and the experience that the kid has with them.
So what was your plan, like, to make that move? Now, at Faith Promise, like you said, you were doing 252. I mean, it's kind of based on large group, small group model. You had a measure of it going, but what was your plan to really get there completely?
Yeah. So when I finally just committed and said, we have to do this. And if I fail, then at least I go down in flames, When I finally decided we needed to move in that direction, we started with ratios. That was the first place I knew to start, and just redefining expectations in the small group leaders' minds. That's when one thing that I realized was we started to recruit more small group leaders, knowing that we needed to get the number of kid to small group leader ratio. We needed to reduce it. I think at the time we were averaging like 15 kids to one small group leader. In elementary. So, like, if you could imagine that, 15 kindergartners with one small group leader.
And when they're younger, it's even a bigger deal.
My gosh.
Although I don't know. I think of those 5th grade boys, it might be the same problem.
Well, that's equally as hard. I don't think there's a lot of difference between 5th grade boys and kindergartners.
That's true. Yeah, the girls' groups probably aren't as bad if they get to 15 at older ages or whatever. Obviously, you don't want to do that, but just from a management, sanity standpoint.
Exactly. And it's really kind of funny when we stop to think about it. Like, there's no wonder that I couldn't retain a kindergarten small group leader to save my life. They didn't feel like they could win ever with 15 kids in their circle. So we started with that. And what I learned from that was it wasn't enough for me to just start recruiting more small group leaders and shoving them in that room and shutting the door. Because I had taught the existing small group team, I had taught them to acclimate to what they already experienced. And so, when we break into small group time and all of our kindergartners go into their small group room and there's 30 kindergartners and 2 leaders, they figure out how to make it work. Now, we look at it and we go, wow, they're not winning in there. This is not going well. They don't know that. They are the frog in the boiling water, and they have acclimated to the temperature of the water, and they've figured it out. And so, and they believe that they're winning because they're surviving, and then I add this small group leader to the mix, but I don't really tell them why. And so they are looking at this other leader like, why is this other person in this room? Maybe I'm not needed anymore. In fact, it feels a little bit better, a little more manageable now that they're here. Maybe I need to go help somewhere else. You see what I'm having? So I don't know if that's anyone else's experience. That was my experience. Like, I should have started with a vision. of what we were doing in the first place. And so I had to learn really quick, wait, I need to start resetting expectations in the minds of these small group leaders. And so we started in every small group huddle before we would send those volunteers into the experience. In every huddle, we started with the same message. We would just tell them, hey, we are moving towards small groups where you guys can actually have a conversation about where kids can have a conversation about their faith. And we understand that they can't have a conversation if they don't have a good seat in the circle. And they don't have a good seat in the circle if the size of the circle exceeds 8 kids. And so we're moving to an 8-to-1 ratio. That means that we're shooting for you to be sitting around a circle with no more than 8 kids in your group. And so if you, as you're sitting in your small group today and you notice, wow, I've got 12, then just know that change is coming because 12 is not the goal. 8 is the goal. I'm looking for a small group leader to be able to pull those excess of 4 kids off your circle and to create a new one. So we started at every single huddle. We would start talking about the goal, which is an 8-to-1 ratio, and explaining why, because we want to give kids a chance so they could have a quality conversation, and we had a fighting chance they can have a quality conversation if they have a good seat in the circle. So that was our first step, was just shaping expectations in the minds of our existing team so they understood why we were bringing more small group leaders into the mix. I would say that from a timeline perspective, it took us a year to get to that 8-to-1 ratio.
In some ways, that's fast. So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about recruiting. I don't know, 50% more volunteers. I'm not sure what the math is, but if you had 12 and you had to go to 8, that's a pretty big deal.
Right.
To recruit that many leaders in a year, that seems like it's pretty aggressive.
It was aggressive, and we moved really fast. Now it took us, trying to remember a time frame in a helpful way. It took us another year to really feel stable. I would say
that makes sense because you get them in, and then you got to. You
kind of have to reset. Exactly. And it's funny how you can talk about vision all the time, but when somebody sees vision in action, it's easier to understand. I think that makes sense. Tell me something and I'm going to understand it to some degree, but show it to me and I'm going to understand it, in a completely different way. And so that's kind of where we were. Like that first year, we were just talking about it and trying to reset what they could expect. By the second year, they were seeing it in action. And so the expectation for the small group leaders had really reshaped at that point to where when I had somebody who, when we had small group leaders who consistently had 10 to 12 kids in their group, they were coming and saying, hey, don't forget, we need another small group leader over here because my group is greater than 8, and so I actually had the opposite problem of, it was no longer, why are you adding people to this room? We don't need this many people, to, hey, we need more people in this room because my circle is getting bigger and I can't have the conversations that I need to have with my kids. So that's where, that the vision is really good and in place when the volunteers who are the ones who are pushing it,
Yeah.
So that was super rewarding. The other, thing that was important for me, I mentioned it earlier, was just creating that system for routing kids. I would say that was the next big change that we made, was how do we become intentional about, routing kids into a small group. So when they show up on Sunday morning, and it's their first time, they've never been before, and they're heading into that elementary experience, how do I route them into a small group? That is the small group that they're going to stay in. How do I do that? And that was, I would say that was all over the map. We tried a variety of different approaches and never felt like any one of them, it really worked well. Until we just came down with what I call the Keller system. And that honestly, that just boiled down to, if I've got multiple small group leaders within a grade. So this is really where, if you've got small groups and you have one small group leader per grade, or grade ranges. So you've got, in your elementary experience, you've got one small group leader for K and first, one small group leader for second and third. Then it's so beautiful because, that's an easy route to make. Mm-hmm. They attend the 10 o'clock service. They're assigned to the K and first small group leader. And that every week, if that small group leader is committed to showing up predictably every single week, which I just don't think small groups can work any other way. I know we keep coming back to that argument of, is it necessary to invite volunteers to serve weekly? And, I'm assuming, Nick, that's a question that somebody listening to this podcast is going to ask.
Oh, sure.
And so we'll go ahead and address it. The answer is yes, because that is your best chance of fostering a relationship. If you've got a volunteer who commits to showing up every other week in a kid's life, then basically what that means is you've got a volunteer who's willing to invest in a kid for a total of 120 minutes a month.
Which doesn't sound like a lot. Yeah.
Doesn't sound like a lot. And I just don't think that you can build a quality relationship, with somebody that you only spend time with 120 minutes out of the month, just doesn't make a lot of sense. And so again, back to that age old question, do you recruit weekly? Absolutely. And again, going back to the scenario, if that weekly volunteer, if there's one small group leader for a grouping of 2 grades, K and first, second and third, fourth and fifth, then you've got a pretty simple route. When that kid shows up on Sunday morning, then they are routed to that K and first small group leader, or that second and third small group leader, that fourth and fifth small group leader. And if they come back the following week because they love their experience, then the chances they're going to see the same face are pretty high. It gets a little more complicated when you've got multiple small group leaders within a grade range. Mm-hmm. And that's where, if you can create a system that routes them to the same small group leader each time they show up, then you've got a better chance at winning. So that was the next step we had to take, was we had to figure out, what does that system look like and how do we make it flexible enough to adapt to the cultural value that you referenced earlier so articulately, that cultural value that the church has overall, meaning we're going to offer 5 worship experiences within a weekend because we just want you to get to church. Mm-hmm. And if your weekend plans conflict with the service time you normally come to, then there are other options you can choose so that you can get to church. That's a church value that is very important, but it feels like it can war against that desire to create a very predictable small group for a kid, And so what I found is we just had to figure out a system that was adaptable enough, flexible enough to work with the overarching value of offering convenient worship experiences, multiple worship experiences for families, but also accommodated the desire to create a consistent face for those kids when they chose to come to church, which is why, I finally came to a point where I was like, okay, I can't predict when a kid is going to come. I can't control when a kid is going to come to church, but I can control where they go when they come. And so we're going to have what I call the color system, which honestly, I didn't come up with it. I totally stole it from somebody else. I steal everything. I'm not original in any way. Yeah. And I just said, okay, if there's 4 small group leaders in kindergarten at the 10 o'clock service, then one is red, one's blue, one's yellow, one's green. And we, group the kids based upon, it used to be, initially we just grouped them. There was no system to it. And then we started to just shift to, we tried date of birth ranges, but then we decided actually schools might be a better, zip codes might be a better way to do that, just so we have a fighting chance of kids being in a circle with other kids who are in their school as well. Mm-hmm. And so, red had a certain zip code, blue had another zip code, green had another one, yellow had another. And then where we needed to shift kids around in order to weight them out so that we didn't have one that was like, the red group had 20 kids and the yellow group had 10, then we would work with the small group leader to figure out who are the kids that we can move, the grouping of kids that we can reassign to another color so that we can make sure that the circles, again, are appropriately sized.
Yeah, and people listening can understand how this is difficult, right? Like this is not necessarily the easier way to do it. I mean, if you just did the large group model or the class model.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I mean, you don't worry about any of this stuff. You don't.
No, it's not. It doesn't feel like algebra. This felt like algebra, and I was so bad at algebra. So I think it felt doubly hard for me, But yeah, that's absolutely true. I think just the challenge of trying to be that specific was the overwhelming part for me. But what I found was the that was where we just had to be committed to the back end logistics because the benefit on the other side was so much greater. And so we decided that, this is complicated. This is hard, and this does take more administrative work, but it is work that is worth it. And we had to learn, that's what led to, honestly, the third thing that we implemented, that was critical to this whole, small group process. And that was our coaching structure, because what we found was we needed help in knowing enough about what was happening in those circles to know when we needed to shift kids into another circle, to know when we needed to introduce another small group leader. And when we did introduce another small group leader into that mix, then how do we then multiply those groups? There's never the right language around splitting up small groups, right? Basically, when you take a small group and you break it up to make it a smaller small group, right? Some churches use splitting, and then we say, well, we don't like splitting. It has a negative connotation. Other churches use birthing, and it's like, okay, birthing just sounds wrong all the way around. And then other churches use the word multiplication, whatever term you want to use. The point is, when you've got to add a small group because the group of kids is growing, right? Then what we found is we didn't know enough about what was happening in that group to know which group of kids to separate out so we can create a new group, and which ones do we keep together. So there was an element of really intimate knowledge that we didn't have, and we needed more help and be able to work with a small group leader to know and make wiser decisions around how we grew those groups, how we added to them, how we multiplied them. And what we discovered was a coaching model was going to help us with that. And so then we started, trying to implement a coaching model. And that, oh my gosh, Nick, I'm telling you, kids ministry alone has had a way of rooting out every fear of failure that I have, It's just ridiculous, because I had seen, I'd been out to North Point Church, has an incredible coaching model in place, and I'd seen it in action. I'd heard about it. I'd even talked to some of their coaches that are volunteers, and again, I'm just like, how do you do this, North Point Church? How do you convince people to buy in so much into your ministry and to give to such a high degree, and it really did war against my own fears of am I capable of doing something like that also, of being able to articulate such a vision that somebody would be willing to give, a good 5-8 hours of their week, towards, coaching, which it's not 5 to 8 hours, but that's kind of what I made it out to be.
Sure. That's nice, because you can it's almost like under promise, over deliver, except it's a little bit different. You know what I mean? I'm going to tell you it's worse than it is. And then once it's actually half as long, you're going to be like, oh, this is easy.
Then you're going to think I'm the best.
You made it sound like this was like a, huge commitment. This isn't bad.
Exactly.
Meanwhile,
it's really 3 hours. Not that bad.
Yeah. Meanwhile, it's 3 hours a week. And, somebody else is over here like, oh yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot.
I know.
That's what I think I say ours is 3 hours a week. Roughly, like an hour and a half on Sunday, hour and a half to week. I don't even know if it is true. That though. It kind of includes like, hey, we're going to get you called out for extra meetings. We're going to, that kind of stuff. So yeah, but that's another big, commitment to ask for this. So I understand the fear of it. It's just like the small group leader one. It's like, I'm asking you to come every week now. And
exactly.
Okay, now I'm asking you to give a few hours a week or whatever.
Exactly. And it was really funny because I grossly underestimated my ability to execute that and implement that. And what I found though is I really, was shortchanging the people on, the volunteers on my team who wanted to give more. I found that I can really fall into this pattern. This can be one of the challenges I face on a regular basis, is I try to protect other people from giving more. And really what that is, Nick, is it's a martyr system. It's a martyr syndrome is what it is. In that I'm willing to give more, but other people aren't, can you hear the, gosh, it just smacks of conceit,
But you don't think of it that way though. Like that's not what you think when you're doing it. It actually feels like generosity, or, you know what I mean? Like I'm watching out for you, and I don't want this for you. I want this for me. And then I've heard other people flip that and say, but you're robbing them of the chance.
That's exactly
as
right.
long, it's their decision, but
Yep.
you're robbing them of the chance to serve and use their gifts and all that stuff.
And that's exactly what I was doing. And I just didn't see it. And so it wasn't until, I had a volunteer on my team, and she was just one of those leaders that, you would never want to make her a small group leader. That just really wasn't her gifting, but she served for me as what I would call a service coordinator, which really just meant she was there to dot the I's and cross the T's during the hour, during that worship experience. And volunteers really leaned on her a ton. And she was really good at what she did. In fact, that was the service time when I always knew I could go to church during that hour when she was running the show, because she could handle everything, But she showed me some things that I didn't realize were possible. And so it was really when I saw her in action, and when I would draw back to what I saw and witnessed, when I saw a really solid coaching model, I realized I actually have a coach here. I have one she has the qualities of coach. She has the ability to coach. I just haven't empowered her to do that. And so that's when she and I sat down and I just said, hey, I want to invite you into a different role. It's a role that we've never had before, and I can't even fully articulate what the requirements of it are. All I know is, here's what I need from you. I need you to do less tasks. I need you to find somebody else to do the tasks that you're doing during the hour. And I need you to do more empowering of the small group leaders. I need you to recognize, here's the thing that was so pivotal for me, Nick, was I watched her empower some small group leaders in very practical ways. Like, she's watching a small group leader who just can't seem to manage their group very well because they don't understand how to set expectations. And I watched her as she pulled that small group leader aside and just said, hey, next week when you sit down with your circle, here's the 3 things I want you to try. I want you to try first setting expectations, make sure they know. Here's what we're all going to agree to. And then second, I want you to start off with that first activity. And here's what I want you to. She coached this small group leader on basically just how to manage their group better. And that small group leader walked away encouraged, and then came back the following week and just regrouped with her for a minute to say, here's what I'm going to do. And then that afternoon, when they walked away from leading their small group, they really felt like they won for the first time ever.
Yeah.
And so I watched how that was coaching in action. So when I sat down with her, I just said, listen, you're already doing this. I just want to ask you, would you officially do this now for every small group leader and not just that one? Yep. And would you help me to define what this could look like? And so she was really kind of the start of what I would call a true coaching model that I had experienced. And man, it really did redefine for me what could be possible within your volunteer team.
Yeah, those two do go hand in hand. And obviously, you're leading a course on small groups with Ministry Boost this fall, but we're also doing one on implementing coaches. That's probably the most popular question I get these days. It used to be on a partnering with parents, obviously volunteer recruitment. I mean, that just never goes away. Small groups, those are always the top 3, but I feel like this coaching one is moving into that. Well, time is unfortunately running short, but I got to hit 2 more things because I have to know now, most of what we just talked about in your journey was like a decade ago, right? So you now have 8 or 9 or 10 years, whatever it is, of history in this model that you moved to. Yeah. And I'm sure you have we could probably sit here for hours of stories you could tell, but just tell us what has it been like? What have been the benefits? Are you glad I know you're glad that you made the shift, but how come? How's it worked? All of that. Tell us what it's been like to run that model now for a long time.
Yeah. It finally has been ministry as I hoped it could be. I think when I think about the reasons why I began in ministry in the first place, the coaching model and the small group model has finally helped us to see, or helped me to be able to experience what I hope to experience, when I started in this 18 years ago. So that's how I could sum it up. Honestly, I've got, I can remember, sitting across from, one of my coaches at Faith Promise. We had a monthly meeting. That was just our cadence of meeting time. I would meet with my coaches on a monthly basis, and we would talk through their teams. And in my transition, this was the point at which I've shared with them now that, God is leading us to join the church, the family at Crosspoint. And so we'll be moving away from Knoxville and moving away from Faith Promise. And those were hard conversations. But sitting across from one of my coaches, and she'd been a coach for about a year. And she said, Gina, she said, I need you to know that I never experienced that, or I never knew that I could lead in ministry. I never knew that God could use me in the way that he uses me in this role. And of course, she's a little bit emotional, but it was an emotional moment for us, knowing that this, our relationship was going to take a different turn. But she had such a clarity around, the direction that God was leading her life. And now suddenly vocational ministry was on the horizon. And that was not something that she would have predicted prior to stepping into a coaching role. It was not something that would have been on her heart prior to stepping into a coaching role. But after her experience, what she realized was she really does. Not only does she have a passion for children's ministry, but she believes she has a calling for it too. And awesome. So she's in the process of pursuing that and pursuing God and what that could potentially look like. But it's super rewarding because I think that when you can really help volunteers to see how they can win in small groups, and by winning, what I mean is how they can really have an impact in how a kid develops an authentic faith. I think when you do that, what the reward for that is, it's hard to measure and it's hard to describe. It's so that you move away from that sense of just trying to survive the weekend and the frenetism that you can experience.
Yeah.
And you move towards this sense that, wow, we really are doing something valuable here. We really are part of something meaningful here, and God is doing a great work. So I can't say enough about small group ministry. And I just think it's the best. It's the best way to do ministry overall.
It is. It's the hardest, but it's the best. Or I don't know. Maybe there's another hard. Well, there probably are certainly in other contexts harder ways, but in our context, it's probably the hardest, but it's probably the best. I even think about. I really don't know the number. I should look this up, but just from experience, I would imagine something like 80% of our kids that get baptized by their small group leader.
Man,
and
the other 20%
so
cool.
would be parents. It would be staff.
Isn't that amazing?
With some exception, it might be some staff, but it would be the staff and the environment. But that alone is like, man, that's really cool. That's comes out of the relationship that they have. I think it also comes from parents not wanting to get in the tub and have to speak. There's probably a little bit of that in there too.
That's funny.
But anyway, that's definitely something that's been big. So we asked you if you would do a course on this with Ministry Boost, because we know you love it. We know you have a lot of great experience with it. So I just want to know from you, people can look at like what the course is like. It's 6 weeks. What are the topics, all that stuff. But what are you excited about as we kind of get ready for that course this fall?
Honestly, I'm excited about being able to equip some quality ministry leaders, which is really practical ways to implement small groups. That's what I'm most excited about. I think it's mostly because it was such a hard road for me. If I can make that road easier for a ministry leader, then that would be tremendously rewarding. So even now, when we're doing a Don't Quit workshop, that goes along with the Don't Quit book that I wrote with Jessica Bueller, and the moments when I can provide just some extra insight to a ministry leader where they can stop and they could go, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about it that way. And practically resolve some of the very challenging issues that they face. That's so fun. And it's like fuel to the fire. So that's what I look forward to the most is, gosh, if I can help you, as Andy Stanley would say, go further, faster, in the small group realm, and to where you don't have to step in the same holes that I stepped into, and you can get over the fears that I faced. If I can help you get over them faster, then that would be a huge win for me.
Well, and this isn't necessarily true of every course we do, but yours is a group course where like people will see each other and talk. And one of the big benefits of that is too, other people are doing it together. So if the other people in the group can get up that courage or get over that fear or write that process, and then you copy it, and you know what I mean? Like that's one of my favorite things is, oh, you already have that? Can I see it? That's great. Yeah. Thanks. Stolen, edited 10%, 10, here we go.
Copy, paste, copy, paste. Yeah, that's going to be on my tombstone right there. Copy, paste.
That's right.
Because that's what I did in ministry. I copied and pasted.
Yeah, which is great. I think that's what we all should do. Why reinvent the wheel? So I'm excited about that for your group specifically, where you'll get to share and do some stuff like that. Cool. If people have any questions, for you, if they want to reach out, what's the best way to get in touch?
The best way is, honestly, it's email. Gina.c.mcclain@gmail is the best way to get a hold of me. I do have a blog out there, GinaMcClain.com, and I've not posted recently, but there's good content on there. And so if you want to go and troll on that blog, then there's some stuff you can get, and you can also reach me through that avenue as well. So those are the best ways.
Cool. And I remember the first time you were on, we talked small groups. There were some posts there about small groups too that people could find helpful.
Totally.
We had linked to that. Cool. Well, Gina, thanks for coming back on the podcast again, third time. And, thanks for doing that course this fall. I'm excited. I mean, when I did a survey a couple years ago, partnering with parents in small groups were the top two things people picked above volunteer recruitment and volunteer leadership development, which I thought, man, that says something. Like that's really cool. It does. So, and I don't even remember which one was 1 or 2, but they were the top two. And so I'm excited, about the course this fall. It's going to be, and all the courses, it's going to be a lot of fun and the stuff we get to learn from each other. So thanks for doing that. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It was such an honor.
Wow, that was really helpful, wasn't it? I mean, just so authentic and real. Anybody who has made any kind of change really understands the fear of that, the challenge, how long it can take, but especially this move, going from kind of a class model or large group model, crowd support model, to a small group model of ministry for kids or students or both is a big challenge, but it's totally worth it. I actually know from experience, being a Sunday school teacher, growing up in a Sunday school model, but also being a Sunday school teacher there for a while, the way that I ran that class, and this is not how all Sunday school is run, of course, but the way that I ran it was not small group like. It was not a relational model of ministry. I was kind of like my wife and I, we weren't married at the time, but we were leading this class together, and we just kind of had to do everything. And it's not like we were good at everything, right? Because you're doing everything when it's that kind of model. And if you have other folks to help, they're just kind of giving support. So moving to a small group model, and that's something we've had at our church for a long time, it's just been so amazing. I mean, the stories that we've seen over the years, the impact that people have in the lives of kids and students, it's just amazing. It's amazing, and I attribute most of it to that model and having that specific committed investment in the lives of kids and students weekly, over time. It's just been a huge thing for our ministry, and we have the stories to tell, and it is not easy. It's hard, but like I said in the beginning, it's worth it. So here are a couple action items I think about coming out of that interview. One would be to get the books Lead Small and creating a Lead Small culture, which is really kind of the leadership book you want for that. I mean, they're just great resources for sure. Get Gina's book, The Guts and Glory of Small Group, so that way you have some resources to work with that can help you kind of create a roadmap. If you already have small groups, hopefully you took some notes of things that are going to make yours better. But if you're implementing small groups, certainly you're going to map out a plan. How can you sit down and think about what's going to be my plan for transitioning to small groups and take some cues from what Gina said about what you can do in your ministry. And then if you want to do this alongside other people, get some shared resources, be part of a community, then certainly check out Gina's course at ministryboost.org. And registration for that closes in 9 days. Hopefully you're listening to this when it comes out. Otherwise, it's going to be less than that. And then it starts in October. So September 27th is the deadline for that, as it is with all of the coaching and the courses that are launching this fall. So don't miss out on that. I hope you'll put this into practice, whether it's implementing small groups or making yours better, because I really have seen the fruit of that. And if you have any questions, email me, nick@nickblevins.com. I don't know as much as Gina for sure, but I could probably get you some resources or some help or some advice from some of the folks that I know who have made this transition. It is absolutely worth it. And you want to continue to improve them. The best ministries I've seen for kids and students overall are built on a foundation of small groups. Well, I hope that was really helpful. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Next week, we're going to talk with my friend Kevin Monahan about the Monahan 10, these great list of 10 things that he uses in leadership that you're totally going to steal and use, just like I did. And so you don't want to miss that. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you next week on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.